I want to continue to help you get acquainted with R by looking at an R notebook. I have already opened up my project. It's called EDRM 710. And I am going to open a notebook. Notice here in my pane, which I have a Files tab, I have the Files tab selected. And so I'm going to pick a notebook, and this one is called Twins Intelligence Study Simple Version. Notice the extension .rmd. That's different than this one up here, which has an HTML extension, which allows me to open up output in a web browser, but I'm not opening up the output, I'm opening up the input. That is the notebook that I create so that you can see what I created. So let me click on that. And then I'm going to go over here just so that we can keep track of what happens in our memory. I'm going to click on the Environment tab, and that will allow us to see whenever we load anything what appears in the environment. At the top of the notebook is what's called a YAML, Y-A-M-L, YAML. It's in between 3 hyphens at the top and 3 hyphens at the end of the YAML. That's where we can provide a title, an author, a date, and what kind of notebook we're going to use. And I always use HTML notebooks. HTML means you'll be able to see it in your web browser. So if I had different packages installed, I could instead, for instance, create a PDF file. But I'm going to stick throughout the semester with the HTML notebook. So this will give me a title, an author, a date. Notice the lowercase for title, author, and date, as well as output. Everything that defines the elements of the YAML are in lowercase. Now, I recommend that you always begin with this little code chunk right here. Remember that to create a code chunk, we can simply come up here to this little C icon, click R, and it will create a code chunk for us, and then we can fill out anything we want in this code chunk. I've already done that, and so I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and let's look at the elements of this code chunk. First, I've added a word here to basically just be a title for the code chunk. I usually don't do that. That's optional. But because this is a code chunk that I'm going to use over and over again, I want to make it clear what it's for, that it's setting up my R notebook. So I called it setup. But again, I wouldn't need to have this. I could have just done this and left it at that. But I went ahead and created this little name for it followed by a comma. Now this part is important because what this says is it says when you run this, don't include anything in your output. No messages, no warnings, no code. Don't include anything in your output. Just run this. And I don't want any of this included in my output, so I'm just going to run it. Now the difference between that and what I'll be using down here, which is echo equals false. The echo equals false means don't include code in my output. Now if I had used include equals false down there, it would say don't include anything. So when it created my little graph here, this box plot I created, that wouldn't have even appeared in my notebook, and that would be defeating the purpose. So this is much more common in your code chunks, that you'll include echo equals false. And you can get to that simply by clicking on this and choosing show output only. And that will give you that echo equals false that you see here. All right, back up to include equals false in our setup chunk. This is going to include a command. This command here is actually going to remove everything from our environment. If you do not have this command, you are at risk for running your notebook and seeing something different than I will see when I run your notebook. And what that can mean is severe grade deductions, because if your notebook doesn't run for me, I won't have anything to grade. That's why I believe this is very important for you to include in every notebook. And you know what? I include this in every notebook that I create, even though I'm not being graded on them, because I want to make sure that when I give my notebook to one of my research partners, they see the exact same thing that I see. So this will remove everything from our environment down here. If you have a bunch of stuff in your environment and don't include that command, well, your notebook is running assuming that that's all in the environment. When I run it, it won't be in my environment. I hope that makes sense. Let me give you an example. Let me set this, I'm over here in my R window. Remember that this is where we run R. Let me set A equals 25. Now see in my environment, A equals 25 is down there. When I click to run this code chunk, the first thing that happens is my environment is cleared. So it's fresh. I'm going to get everything from then on that is run is going to be put into my fresh environment, my cleared out environment. So that is an important step. And then the next step that I also always include in all my notebooks is library here, which will allow me to read in my data from any location. In this class, I require that your data all be in a data folder. Let me show you that I have a data folder. Here is my main project folder. Notice data. And here are all the data that I have. So you have to have a data folder. Okay? So when I click library here, that will allow me whenever I read in data to indicate that it's in the data folder, which is exactly what I do here in this next code chunk. In this code chunk here, again, I've given it a name, read data, that's optional. Again, I've set include false because I don't want anything to appear in my notebook. I just want to read in the data. This is telling me to read in a CSV. Read.csv is the function I've shown you for reading in CSV data. But instead of just having twiniq.csv, in which it assumes the data is going to be in the same place as my notebook, I'm now indicating here are where the data are found. They're in the data folder, comma, and here's the name of the CSV file. So this will be the common way that you will always read in data, but that will not work if you have not loaded the here library. So these two code chunks would be important for your template, and then all you have to do is change the name of your CSV file every time and you're good to go. So you could start every notebook with these two code chunks. Make sure your data is in your data folder. Why? Because I'm always going to read the data out of my data folder, and if you put it somewhere else, it will not read, the notebook will not run, and I will have nothing to grade. All right, after I do this preliminary work, now I'm here going into the first section. I'm not going to spend any time here with this because we discussed it in our class meeting. I'm going to go to analysis. I will just remind you when I start my analysis that I began with a figure, and notice here that I gave the figure a name. Notice it's a, what did I make it? A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th level heading. That's just my preference. You can make it a 4th level heading, a 3rd level heading, but I thought that that was a nice size for the figure. And here is my narrative. This little command you might find useful. This is a little command to say, put extra space here. It puts one line of extra space. So you may want to use that. There's actually other ways that we can put in extra space. I'm just used to using this HTML code. It's web-based code. And so I just do that naturally because I work with HTML code quite a bit. So you don't have to worry about how funny it looks. You could just copy that, and anytime you want some extra space, you can put it in. If you need multiple lines of extra space, you can put in multiple ones of these. So I could have done this. I could have done more spaces like that, and each time it will create a new line for you. Okay, so let me go ahead now up here. I ran that first code chunk already to clear the environment and load the here library. Let me run the second code chunk, which reads in the data. I could have just come here and said run all right here and run the entire notebook. But I'm showing it to you one code chunk at a time, and you see that little green arrow allows me to run the code chunk. Notice there's the twins data. It's been loaded. If I click on this little blue arrow, I can see that it has 3 different variables in there: foster, biological, and social. And if I actually clicked on the name twins, it will open up what looks like a little spreadsheet and show me my data. Let me go ahead and close that so we're back at our notebook. Okay, so I have analysis. I have my first figure. Running that code chunk will give me that particular figure. I'm not going to talk about how I created that because I do that in other videos. Down here is a table of statistics, so I can run that. And here's my little simple table of summary statistics. I talk about that in other notebooks as well, and so on. So you can see that I've got all my tables listed and labeled, all my figures labeled. And so when I'm all done, if I run all to make sure that everything runs, it starts at the beginning, clears my environment, and then runs everything. And now I have a new notebook that if I were to go to my files and look at, well, there's a couple ways of doing this. One is I can go over to my notebooks, and I can see here that I have a twins simple version intelligence study with the HTML. And if I clicked on that, it will allow me to open in the editor, which I don't want because that's a bunch of funny looking code. Let me show you. Well, actually, it's going to open the same notebook I already had in this particular case, it looks like. Yeah, so it didn't open anything else. So let me click on View in Web Browser. If I click on that, it will show it in the web browser. So let me go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to bring it over to show you. This is what I got. And that's the way I actually grade your work, is I don't look at your notebook, I look at this. So that's why you want to make sure it looks beautiful, nice and organized. Notice my figure heading, and there's the figure. Notice my table heading, there's the table, another table, there's the table, here's another figure, and so forth. All the way down to the conclusions and the press release. So I hope that helped you see how we read in data, how we set up our notebooks, how we organize our notebooks. And in the next video, which is really optional because it's for those who want to push the envelope a little, I'm going to show you the same analysis, but create it using some R packages to make the notebook even more beautiful. I don't require beauty. You can get 100% by simply being organized and neat. But for those who want to make a more aesthetically pleasing notebook, and if you want to prepare for your future in doing actual research reports that you want to make as nice looking as you can, you might want to join me there in the next video and look at a little more complicated notebook.